I'm here this morning to speak to the Commission about a critical issue that's facing not only this county, but governments and communities across the nation. Even though I'm a litigator, I'm not standing here in any representative capacity vis-a-vis my position as an attorney. I'm here because I love this county. I don't know and can't think of any place in the world that I would rather be living right now in this time. There's no more beautiful place. There's no more free place in terms of how our citizens are able to pursue their life. And there's no more healthy place, quite frankly. And the issue that we're facing with 5G is that the telecom industry has gotten way ahead of us. And I'm not going to make any presumptions about what anybody on this commission knows about 5G, but I'm here to provide some information so that henceforth nobody can claim ignorance. My wife and I of 28 years have 4 kids, 2 biological, an adopted 3.5-year-old, and we have a foster care child that we would like to adopt. And I believe it is incumbent upon us to steward this county well. There are going to be voices that want to tell you that you have no power, that they've already beaten us to the punch, that the FCC's already got it figured out, that the legislature's already put a statute in place to bind your hands. I'm going to ask this commission to not hide behind the fig leaf of futility. The bottom line is that if you will govern well in this situation and do your fact-finding, your traditional public policy analysis as to whether or not this purported benefit to humanity is worth the risks, if you'll just do that assessment and leave the legal team to make the determination as to how best the commission can move forward, if it in fact makes the determination that there are public policy problems, then that will be well serving the citizenry. Before I move on to some facts regarding 5G, I just want to thank the Commission for the amazing job that you have done over the last 10 to 12 weeks. I've scoured history, and I don't think there's ever been a more difficult time to govern. You'd think that with all of the data and information that we have available to us to allow you to inform your decision-making, that good data would be easy to come by. And we all know that that's not true. It was in fact part of my sifting through data and information to try to discern the truth about certain things that have been happening over the last 10 to 12 weeks that had me stumble across this 5G issue. Now let me first tell you that the issue of 5G is not something that's relegated to tinfoil hat aficionados. That's not the case. I practice in both state and federal law, federal court. I handle complex matters, and I have looked at enough information to convince me to spend hours and hours of my own free time delving into source documents to determine whether or not that there's any truth to this situation. I'm not standing in front of you as a person who's afraid of 5G. There are methods and there are protocols and there are things that we can do to roll out certain of this technology in a way that makes sense from a public policy standpoint. I don't operate in fear anyways. I'm one of these crazy Christians that believes that there is a God in the universe who actually is fully informed about all of these issues and that can be glorified in the outcomes, even in the face of stupid, barbaric, or just feckless decisions by those whom he gave free will. But I do believe that we're given the obligation to steward our communities and our families and our resources. Now, if you're anything like me, up to about 12 weeks ago, I didn't really know anything about 5G. I had heard about the issues involving China and the national security issues, but I had largely ignored it. I hadn't ignored it as much as it was just real quiet. There's not a lot out there. When you go start trying to research this situation, it's going to be very interesting to you how muted the issue is from an informational standpoint, even though it has broad-ranging implications. And if you look at our data sourcing and where we get our data, and then you look at the interests that are peculiarly or particularly impacted by a dissemination of information that may not be all rainbows and unicorns on the issue of 5G, you'll begin to figure out why it is that it's hard to get the information. And for the record, back to the idea of conspiracy theory. Every good investigator is a conspiracy theorist. So don't let that moniker become something that makes you fearful or decide not to go down a path of further inquiry just because something is labeled as a conspiracy theory. You know who really loves it when you refuse to consider a conspiracy theory? The conspiracists. I'm encouraging focal point on source documentation because not all conspiracies are accurate or well-founded. But when I began to look for source documentation and I began to peer into the wormhole, which is the 5G issue, I came across some amazingly frightening information. I have at your table, or I've given to Mr. Miller, a packet of information that I'm not going to go through. I have 2 minutes and 47 seconds left. And as a lawyer, that's less than a .1. You're done. I'm giving this information to you with the idea that I'm going to be back here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to die in this county. And so as long as I'm here, I'm going to be trying to communicate information on 5G and perhaps other things. But I want you to look through that information because according to thousands of scientists, the millimeter wave radio frequencies associated with 5G have been causally related to alteration of heart rhythm, altered gene expression, altered metabolism, altered stem cell development, cancers, cardiovascular disease, cognitive impairment, DNA damage, impacts on general well-being, increase in free radicals, learning and memory deficits, particularly in the young, impaired sperm function and quality, miscarriage, neurological damage, obesity, diabetes, oxidative stress. And that piece of that one handout that I gave you is the tip of an informational iceberg. Effects in children include autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and asthma. And recent evidence, including the latest studies on cell phone use and brain cancer risk, indicated that RF radiation is a proven carcinogenic to humans and should now be classified as a Group 1 carcinogen along with tobacco smoke and asbestos. I don't know about you, but that's kind of shocking to me. I had no idea. And the 5G stuff is particularly troubling for reasons that we don't have time to bear into today. Now, what is the ask at this point? Because I have 49 seconds. I ask that we continue this conversation. If you want to set up a committee or you want to relegate staff resources, that's clearly your business. But I have a lot more to say on this, and this is a critical issue. And I'm asking Collier County, let's continue to be the most beautiful and free and healthy place for people to grow children and to grow businesses and to retire. If you turn a blind eye to this 5G issue and try to hide behind the fig leaf of futility, it will be a catastrophic mistake that literally history will look back upon and determine that you have not undertaken good governance. I have very strong convictions that you will do otherwise, and I'm hoping that you will.
Mr. Boatman, if you'd stay there for just a few moments. Generally, we do not engage in conversations with people that make presentations like this. We do sometimes decide whether or not we're going to direct staff to take a look at certain things. So there may be some questions. I have a couple, but let me see if any of my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Boatman on this particular issue. Or for Mr. Boatman, I do have just a couple. Are there any other communities, cities, or counties, states in the United States now that are taking a hard look at this? Has your research reflected that there are other communities that are looking at this issue? And if you know those, if you could let me know what those are.
There are. I will get that list of communities to you at a later time. I can tell you that Florida League of Cities has sued Telecom. They have just about 3 weeks ago suffered a procedural setback in that the action was dismissed, but it was a procedural dismissal, and they're going to be back. But the Florida League of Cities is suing right now on this very topic. And there are, when you start to look, there are proliferations of sort of anti-5G activity going on, because it's amazing. They have taken away the local government's ability to speak at all into this extreme public policy issue. These antennae are going to have to be placed every 250 to 750 feet. And they've taken away your ability to say anything other than whether or not the structure meets certain nominal requirements. You can't say anything or ask any question about the box that goes into that, which is communicating the radio frequencies which have been told to be carcinogenic.
Yeah, my recollection is that if we have a light pole, or street lighting, they can put those on any light pole that we have no regulation over that. We can charge, I think, a fee.
It's maxed out at like $250. It is.
Commissioner McDaniel?
And I didn't have any specific questions for you, Mr. Boatman. I appreciate you coming in and speaking to us today, but I've read enough about this, conspiracy theory or not, that it's certainly something that we need to pay attention to. And I would suggest, if we can, let's have a public hearing on it. I mean, do an exec and I'll do it, or you do it. Somebody do it, and then and let's bring it up and see if we can work with our legislators to not get shot out of the saddle before we have a chance to say so. We've been making moves, and I've been supporting them by allowing for catalysts, if you will. I call them bouncers to be attached to our telephone poles and such, just to amplify our capacity to get on our internet. Just from an economic standpoint, it can be huge for rural, economically deprived communities to be able to have access to be able to get out. And I've been an advocate for those things, but on the same token, there's enough from what I've been able to read, there's enough information for us to keep a close eye on this.
All right. Commissioner Solis?
Just curious. I mean, I'm looking at my phone and it says 5G on it. I mean, have we rolled 5G out in Collier County? Is it already here? Because my phone says 5GE.
Uh-oh. You make sure you stay at that end.
So,
I'm pointing at you again. Make sure
I'm just, yeah. I mean, I'm just curious as to do.
It's already here in pockets.
Okay, so.
Commissioner Taylor?
What's our timeline?
It's
happening.
What's your end game? What do you want us to do? If you were waving your magic wand, what do you want us to do?
set up a meaningful committee that will assess every area that should be rationally considered from a public policy standpoint, including health, aesthetics, property values. You look at what happens statistically to the property value of a home where one of these antennas is placed, it plummets. In fact, it can become unsellable. And they want to put them every 250 to 750 feet. And they put in the chapter that they passed to force this down your throat, the ability for telecom to sue local governments if you try to slow them down. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The gentleman right now that's heading the FCC, who was put there by President Obama, was in-house counsel for Verizon. I'm not anti-Verizon, really. I have a Verizon. I've always loved Verizon. But the 5G stuff, we have to govern how it's rolled out because they got way ahead of us.
Commissioner Solis?
Yeah, I did have one more question, and it's a question for our county attorney. I mean, we are preempted on things every day. It happens every day. And, you know, before I think we should spend a lot of time and energy on doing this, I mean, or looking into this, I'd like to understand from a legal perspective from our county attorney, one, is it our state legislature that's preempted us, or is it the federal government and the FTC, and how preempted are we?
Completely preempted by both the state and the federal government. This is not a local issue. The rollout of a national telecommunications system is a national issue. Congress has delegated to the FCC all issues with respect to the safety of it. There have been several lawsuits over the years on this, and each and every one of them resulted in a local government has no power over this.
Commissioner Fiala?
Yes. So does this mean then, when they do this now, I'm very lax on knowing what all is involved. Does this mean they can spy on us all the time? I'm just going to flat out ask.
Well, Commissioner, that's an excellent question because, in fact, that's at the core of what 5G is all about. I don't think anybody in this room thinks we need to be able to download Netflix any quicker to our phones. That's not what 5G is all about. 5G is about locating where you are as a human being so that they can better monetize that reality. In addition, like the 5G allows them to put facial recognition on the same backpacks that have the communication devices to not only determine whether it's you, Commissioner Saunders, but whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood, or maybe you look sick, and so maybe you should be confined to your home. This is really interesting, and this is not conspiracy. The first rollout of 5G was in Wuhan, China, and if you study a little bit about it, it's like, it's remarkable. And let me say one last thing on the issue of preemption, because I'm telling you something, that's exactly what they want this commission to conclude. Do you know what doesn't preempt? It doesn't preempt the Constitution. This is a Fourth Amendment issue.
Let me make a suggestion. I think this will be consistent with what a couple of commissioners have said. I'd like an analysis from our county attorney as to what other communities. We have the Florida League of Cities, so that may be an easy source of information. Take a look at their complaint, perhaps talk to their legal department, and get a sense of what our authorities would be going forward, and perhaps give us a report at our next meeting. Not a public hearing. I don't think it's a good idea to have a public meeting on this issue until we know whether or not there's anything we could do, because this is a type of issue that could generate a lot of interest, and I don't want to disappoint a whole lot of people by having them come to a meeting to talk about this when our county attorney may very well tell us that there's nothing we can do. I think that's the first step. Let's see if I think there's a consensus, seems to be a consensus, that we don't want to just let this issue go away. But we also, I think, need to understand what, if anything, we can do. And we have some examples that you've mentioned. And perhaps, Mr. Boatman, you can provide information to our county attorney, help him get that started, because we're not giving him a long time frame here to come back with a report on what we could consider. And Mr. Klaskow, our next meeting is in about 3 weeks. Is that enough time, or would you want that to be the second meeting in June?
No, that's sufficient time. I've already done the research to give you the answer that I gave you now. It's just a
Okay.
question of putting it into writing now.
Okay, well, I understand, but I do want you to check
We'll
with
get a
the
full
Florida League of Cities because they're taking some action and they generally do a pretty good job, so they've got to have some basis for that.
And they're not acting independently from
Well,
the cities.
But let's not make any assumptions as to what's going on. I'll give you a full
Right.
report.
Okay. All right, any other comments from the commission?
And the only thought was, and this is just, you know, I'm all for a report, but and if we are handcuffed already, then fine. But the public hearing aspect of it, I can understand it. But we're actually doing virtual interface with folks now, are we not? So I mean, if you wanted to go the public.
I just think that we have to have a bit of an understanding of whether or not there's anything we could do.
You know, it's a fine step to do that, and then we can make a decision on our.
That's not to suggest that we would do anything, but just, you know, if the two of you could work together a little bit on that and come back in a couple weeks.
If I could, one more thing. What it's going to come down to is a lawsuit by the county that attacks the fundamental decision by either the legislature or the feds that the 5G rollout is consistent with the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. That's a constitutional issue that has to do with federalism. This is the kind of case that could well matriculate up to the Supreme Court of the United States. But if we're just going to point at the work done by the lobbyists, I can already tell you the determination that's going to be made. This is going to take battle lines. But that's why I think while we're discussing what options the county has, why not begin the public policy questions? Because if you came to the determination.
Mr. Boatman?
Yes, sir.
We've gone a whole lot further than we normally
Thank
do.
you, sir. I appreciate that.
And we've asked, I think, the county attorney to help us along on this. And I would certainly not support even the thought of filing a lawsuit that may go to the United States Supreme Court until I understand that we have some basis for doing something. So that's where we are, as far as I'm concerned, and I think the board tends to agree with that.
And
Commissioner
I would
Solis?
yeah, I would just also be interested in what the Florida Association of Counties' position is as well. I mean, I think those are two good organizations, and we're a member of one, and I'd like to know what theirs is as well.
The issue that's been litigated primarily is the amount of money. As you know, they've been throwing the devices in our right-of-way, on our poles, and the dispute that the Florida Association of Counties have had is actually with the compensation issue more than anything else.
That's what I understand that as well. All right, let's move on. Thank you, Mr.
Sir, I
Boatman.
really appreciate it.